Well, for everybody watching and listening, when it comes to Eagles football, there's only one person to talk to, the Hall of Famer himself, Ray Didinger. Ray, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
So there's a lot to talk about. But my first question, before we start talking football, are you retired? Are you semi-retired? What are you calling it these days? Because I guess the full retirement didn't last too long, right?
Yeah, I formally retired in May 2 years ago. So we're coming up on 2 years. And but I still am around. I'm still doing some stuff. I mean, that very first year, the Eagles wound up going to the Super Bowl. So both WIP and NBC Sports Philly asked me to come back and work through the postseason and that whole run up to Super Bowl, which I did. And then I've continued to do things for both. I mean, I'm on WIP once or twice a month. NBC Sports Philly uses me now and again, like around draft time, things like that. So, but I'm at a good place in the sense that, I can really pick and choose. I can kind of decide how much or how little I want to work, when I want to work. And it's good. So I'm still kind of got my hand in, and the phone still rings. And one of the things I've learned over the last 2 years is it seems like everybody in the world has a podcast. So
that's true.
I'm doing a lot of these kinds of things, but it's all good. I mean, I enjoy it. I mean, it's what I've been doing my whole life. And we've had some pretty good stuff to talk about in Philadelphia the last couple of years. The Phillies going deep into the postseason. Eagles coming within 30 minutes of winning the Super Bowl a year ago.
Really?
There's been a lot of good stuff to talk about, and and I'm only too happy to do that.
Well, I think as long as you're willing to do it, you will always be in demand, my friend. Were you surprised? Because I remember when you broke the news of your retirement on WIP, and I think it was only, a couple of weeks before you actually did step away from the radio and
Right.
from NBC Sports Philly. Were you surprised at the outpouring you got? Because knowing what I know about you, I get the feeling that you don't realize the impact that you had on people, and you still do have on people.
I think that's very true. I was surprised. I was real surprised. Um, I My plan was, I mean, I had known, months before that I was going to retire. I mean, my contract was for both for WIP and for NBC, were both coming up at that time at the end of May, and I really knew, like around Christmas, New Year's, that was going to be it. That I was not going to sign a new contract. I was ready. I was just ready to retire. And so I had made up my mind then. I told Glenn Macnow, my radio partner for
Right.
21 years, I felt like I should tell him that I had kind of decided that this was going to be it. And he said, "Well, how do you want to handle it?" And I said, that final day, the final day, I'll just say, "Hey, this is my last show." And he said, "No, no, no, no. That really won't do." He said, "I really think you need to give our audience a chance to say goodbye."
Yeah.
I certainly didn't want to turn it into a farewell tour. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But the station kind of talked me into saying, "Look, why don't you announce it? If you're going to be going out at the end of May, at the end of your contract, announce it at the beginning of May. At least give people 3 or 4 weeks. If they want to call up and you wish you well, say goodbye, and they'll have a chance to do that." So that's what we did. But yes, to your point about the way people responded to it, the outpouring, yes, far more than I imagined. I mean, I got, probably about 600 cards and letters.
Wow.
And then probably, I mean, I couldn't begin to count how many emails poured in from people that most of them, 90% of them I didn't even know, but just were sending along their good wishes and saying how much they had enjoyed my work over the years, newspapers, TV, and radio, and that they were going to miss having me on the radio on the weekends. And that was really nice. I mean, the stuff that people said, that sense of appreciation, and how people had just been paying attention. That was nice to know. So it was really, really a very, very nice, warm feeling.
You're one of the few people in our industry, and again, you reeled off, newspapers, TV, radio, books. You've written a play. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff, and you've been a success in everything. And I don't know anybody who has a bad word to say about you, and I can't think of too many people who I could say that about.
Yeah, a few people have mentioned that. The business it's a contentious business. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of anger and rancor at the time. But it hasn't. I haven't been involved in a whole lot of that, and I think people have asked me to explain that. I don't know that I can explain it, other than to say that I just kind of feel like for 53 years, I've just kind of been trying to be just an honest guy.
Yeah.
Not a sensationalist, not a big pot stirrer, not a guy that thrives on controversy, a guy that has certainly not been afraid to be critical. But when I've been critical, I've been fair about it.
Sure.
I haven't gone after people personally. I've just tried to do my job in an honest, straightforward way, and I think people kind of respect that. And I think the fact that I'm from Philly, born and raised here, I think people understand that I'm kind of one of them. And when I speak and when I talk and when I offer opinions, people kind of think that I'm speaking for Philadelphia,
Absolutely.
and that I'm kind of a guy that I'm kind of a guy that they would have liked to have sat next to in the 700 level, or a guy that they would have liked to have stood next to during one of the Phillies World Series parades. That I'm of the community, that I'm of Philadelphia. And that I've been part of this for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's and the fact is that's really all I ever tried to be. I never thought about being a quote unquote celebrity. I never went for the big splash. I just tried to do my job from day to day in a good, honest way. And if that's how people kind of remember me, and that's kind of how people feel about me now, I'm good with that.
Well, I'm glad you decided to come back, even on a limited basis. You're doing stuff with the WIP morning show, I know. Like you said, you're back occasionally in NBC Sports Philly. Let's talk some Birds, because as we record this on Wednesday evening, the 13th of March, lots going on. And forgive me because I'm battling a cold, so I'm sorry for the coughing. Saquon Barkley. Did the signing surprise you, and what are your thoughts on it?
A little bit. We began to hear rumors about it, a couple weeks ago, that it was clear he was not going back to New York. So there were teams interested, and a couple weeks ago you began hearing the Eagles are real interested. That surprised me a little bit because they have not been over time a team that spends a whole lot of money at the running back position.
Right.
That's just not the way they do things generally. So the idea that they would pay the money to bring in a pretty big ticket running back is a little out of character for them. But I mean, I certainly thought it was a good idea. I think that, I've been a Saquon Barkley fan from all the way back to Penn State. I mean, I just think he's a real special player. And you could get a good argument back and forth about whether he should have been the second overall pick in the draft, and then you get into the whole idea of how high in the draft you take running backs and all of that kind of stuff. But if you just evaluate Saquon Barkley as a player and as a teammate and just a person, I mean, he checks all the boxes, I think. And I've thought that for a long time. So the fact that the Eagles were in on that was a little surprising to me, but I thought, I would like to see this happen because now, having said that, I think the real key to this acquisition is how do you use him?
Right.
If you're going to go and make this kind of investment, and it's a significant investment now. I mean, you're talking about you're going to be paying him more than $12 million a year. Eagles haven't paid a running back that in a while. If you're going to make that kind of investment in him, then you better have a really well thought out, well conceived plan about, okay, how are we going to use this guy? I think that I still think at 27, I know he's had some injuries, but not really over the last 2 years. I mean, he's been pretty healthy the last 2 years. I still think he has a lot of good football left in him.
Yeah, I agree.
How are the Eagles going to use him? How's the new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore going to use him? We saw it when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator in Dallas. We saw the many ways he used Ezekiel Elliott. And I could see Saquon Barkley being that kind of player too. Running the ball between the tackles, yes, but also catching a lot of balls out of the backfield.
Yeah.
I could see if that's really what they have in mind, and I'm assuming it is, then I think that's a pretty good plan. Saquon Barkley has never run behind a good offensive line in the NFL. He just hasn't. The Giants have tried different combinations on the offensive line, and none of it's worked. I mean, if you watch the film, week in and week out, the Giants' offensive line play it's really poor. And so whatever yardage Barkley has gotten over the last 6 years, he's pretty much gotten it on his own. Now you bring him here and you put him behind this offensive line on an offense that has the kinds of playmakers that the Eagles have with Smith, with Brown, with Goddard. You put Saquon Barkley out there and, sometimes line him up in the backfield, maybe sometimes put him in the slot. Sometimes you could even split him out wide. That's a lot of firepower out there. And if Kellen Moore tries to use him the way he used Zeke Elliott in Dallas, I think that could be a pretty exciting combination.
So you mentioned all the weapons, and now another one with Barkley. How much pressure is on Jalen Hurts next season?
Huge. Because, I mean, we can talk all we want, and certainly everybody's been talking about the last few days, all the moves that the Eagles have made. Pretty good ones, really, if you look at some of the players they're bringing in. But none of it matters if the quarterback doesn't play.
Right.
I mean, you can have all of these guys, but if Jalen Hurts doesn't play like the guy that you are paying him to be and the guy that you expect him to be, then the whole thing doesn't work. It's only going to work if he plays like the Jalen Hurts that we saw 2 years ago. If he can get back to that level, yeah, then they really have something. But last year, I mean, there's no getting around it. I mean, last year he took a major step back. And now you just have to hope that with a new offensive coordinator and the addition of Barkley, that he can kind of find it, and get it back again. But I don't know how much of it was a regression on his part, and how much of it was just what I just thought was a poorly designed, poorly called, poorly executed offense.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out.
I just thought the overall scheme and the down play calling and a lot of the stuff that was coming in from the sidelines was part of the problem. I don't know that anybody really fully appreciated what a good coach Sean Steichen was.
Yeah.
When he was here 2 years ago. I think you kind of know now when you see the difference in this team, plus the difference he made going to Indianapolis in his first year. He's a really, really good coach, and they missed him big time. So now you've made some changes in the offensive staff. You bring in a new offensive coordinator, a guy that's had success before. And I think they're going to bring in some new ideas, which they needed, because last year this offense was just stuck in mud.
So If Hurts does not revert back to 2022, if he has another year in 2024 like he had this past season, could you see them, even with the cap hit, could you see them trying to move on from Hurts? I mean, we saw what Denver just did with Russell Wilson, so taking a big cap hit is not unheard of these days.
No. I would be very surprised.
Yeah, okay.
I would be very surprised. I think that they're, I'm sure they were disappointed in last year. I'm sure Jalen Hurts was disappointed in last year, but I still get the feeling that as an organization, they're still all in on Jalen Hurts, and they should be. I mean, just 2 years ago, he was shoulder to shoulder with Patrick Mahomes for the MVP.
Yeah.
And this year was not a good year for him or the whole team, but there were a lot of circumstances contributing to that. It's now we'll just see with a new coach, a new system, and a real high quality running back in the backfield with him, how much of that he can get back now.
What were your thoughts on Nick Sirianni? Were you of the thinking that, look, he won a lot of games, we had 3 playoff appearances, a Super Bowl appearance, or were you of the thinking he oversaw the biggest collapse in team history? Did you support him coming back?
Yeah, I did. I thought I really didn't when the unraveling began down the stretch in the regular season. And the conversation began that Sirianni might not survive this. I was one of the people that said, I don't see that happening. I mean, the guy's, this is his 3rd year here. You're going to the playoffs for the 3rd straight year under him. It wasn't more than a month ago that they had the best record in the NFL. I mean, the guy's, if you talk about an entire body of work, his entire body of work, pretty good, I thought. So the idea that, oh no, if they lose down in Tampa Bay, no, he's going to be gone. I didn't think that. However, when I watched the Tampa Bay game and I saw the way the team played that night and how they just got totally handled by, what I think is a pretty mediocre Tampa Bay team. I mean,
Agreed.
It's a team that the Eagles just dominated in week 3. I mean, the Eagles completely outclassed them in that same stadium back in September.
Yeah.
Now in the playoff game, you're going to go down there and you're going to get throttled like that. When I saw how bad that was, I began to think, you know what? maybe Jeffrey is going to make a change. It would have surprised me, and it would not have been a decision that would have been very well received around the NFL. I mean, people would have said that Jeffrey Lurie's got a pretty quick hook on this guy, and so I thought that he would survive it. However, he's got a lot to answer for, and when a team, let's face it, I mean, there's no other way to put it. They did not show up in Tampa Bay for a playoff game.
Right.
For a playoff game. I mean, they had, as bad as they stumbled down the stretch in the regular season, once they got to the playoffs, it's a whole new season. I mean, they could have turned this whole thing around and gotten themselves on a little bit of a run in the postseason. That opportunity was there. But they went down to Tampa Bay and they just flat didn't show up. I mean, they were, in my view, watching that game, they were never in that game. I mean, they were just never in that game. Again, to a Tampa Bay team that I thought was pretty average. That was an indictment of a lot of things.
Yeah.
But you would certainly have to lay a lot of it at the feet of the head coach, because that team was not ready to play. And how do you not have a team ready to play when you're playing in the playoffs? That was not good. So, Nick Sirianni's coming back, and look, 3 straight years in the playoffs, all that stuff, Super Bowl last year, all well and good. But he's got to start putting this thing, that this team was broken at the end of the season. And now it's up to the head coach to put it all back together again.
What was the big issue on defense? Was it the coordinator change? Because, you think back to early on in the season, the defense looked okay against Kansas City, looked good against Miami. Is it talent? Was it the change from Desai to Patricia? What was the big issue in your mind?
It was. I think it starts with talent. I just don't think they had really good players there. I mean, the linebackers, once again, the linebackers were not, they just weren't good enough. They just flat out weren't good enough, that linebacker. And then in the secondary, James Bradbury, who had been pretty good the season before, just had a dreadful year. And Darius Slay wasn't as good as he had been the year before. I mean, the year before they had good play at the corners. That was not true last year. The loss of C.J. Gardner-Johnson to Detroit was a big loss. I mean, He had come in and he had played really well for them the year before. Now they got him back, but they certainly missed him last year. Everything in that back seven just wasn't good. The linebackers weren't good enough, and the secondary wasn't good enough. Good quarterbacks just had a field day against this team. So I think their feeling was, we know we have some issues at linebacker. We know we have some issues in the secondary, but we have so many good players on the defensive line that we'll be able to work around it. We'll stop the run. We'll get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and that will cover up for some of the problems we have on the back end. Well, that wasn't really true. I mean, for all the talent they had on the defensive line didn't play that well, and certainly down the second half of the year. So I think that number one issue on defense was the talent, was the players. They just weren't good enough. Now, what happened with Desai and then Patricia, that compounded it.
Yeah.
I thought Desai was not a particularly good coordinator, but I think when they made the decision to go to Patricia late in the season, then that just made things worse, because Patricia came in and tried to do some different things and install some different things and make some different calls. And now that wasn't going to make the players better, because they already weren't good enough. But now you had those same players playing a system they were unfamiliar with. So now they were not good enough, and they were confused on top of it.
Yeah, right.
And that's why when you watch the film of that team after the change, by the end of the year, I'm not exaggerating when I say by the end of the year, they were the worst defense in the NFL.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
They were the worst defense in the NFL. And, you're not going to rebuild all of that overnight. They're going to have to start now. And, okay, they brought in Vic Fangio, who's been a defensive coordinator in the NFL forever, and is a good coach and has a very, very well-defined defensive philosophy that has worked and won in multiple cities. That's fine, but you need to give them some better players to work with.
No doubt, no doubt. Was that a panic move, do you think, going from Desai to Patricia?
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought it kind of sent that message to the players. I thought that it kind of sent that. I think when you make that kind of change in the season, it sends a message to the players that, okay, something's really wrong here. And the coach is hitting the panic button. Desai had not distinguished himself, shall we say, but to pull the rug out from under him as he did and hand the reins over to Matt Patricia, that I think sent a bad message to the whole team. And then from that point on, the defense just went from bad to worse.
Agreed. Were you surprised that Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox decided to call it a career?
No. I would have been surprised if they had come back, to be honest.
Okay.
I thought that, Jason Kelce, I think the reason he came back, probably in both of them, I'm sure after last season, after the Super Bowl, I'm sure they both thought about retiring then. Jason Kelce talked about it very openly. Fletcher Cox, not so much, but I think they had to both be thinking about it at that point. They had reached that point in their careers. And I think they both decided to come back for the simple reason that they thought they were that close to winning it.
Right.
And come back and let me play another year, because I think next year we can come back and win this thing. And then I'll go out. Well, turned out to be not the case. And when the season ended the way it ended, and especially when you saw that shot that they had of Jason Kelce in the final minutes of that Tampa Bay game, when he's standing on the sidelines and he's looking up at the clock, and you can see that he's he has tears in his
Getting
eyes.
emotional, yeah.
Yeah, I mean to me, I said, well, that's this is it. I mean, he was talking to Jeff Stoutland, and it was the kind of conversation that I've seen before, and it's
right.
it's basically a guy saying goodbye, a guy who's had a great career, and now he's just taking in those last couple of minutes, and I that's what I saw. And then when he came out, there was the report that he had told his teammates he was retiring. Made perfect sense to me. Then he asked publicly, he asked for a little time to think it over. But I felt that he was going to retire. And I mean, could he have continued playing? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, he's still one of the elite offensive linemen in the NFL, and has not lost anything. I mean, the last couple of years, even in his mid-30s, he has played great football. So you're not talking about your typical mid-30-ish guy who's clearly his talents are eroding, and it's sort of like, hey pal, it's time to go. That was not Jason Kelce. I mean, he was still playing at an extremely high level, and could probably come back next year and do the same thing. But
I totally agree.
He's had such a great career. He's an all-time great Eagle. There's no question he's certainly going to go into the Eagles Hall of Fame. I don't think there's any question he's going to go into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Agreed.
The team will probably retire his number. I mean, every honor you can give a guy, they will give him, and justly so.
All right.
But the thing is, he's reached a point in his life where he is such a star, and he has so many opportunities, and so many people want him to do this and to do that. He's got a growing family, married, 3 little girls. I think it's time. I think it's just the perfect time for him to walk away.
Oh, agreed. He's got nothing left to prove. Like you said, great career. He's got his Super Bowl ring already. Now, in all your years of covering Eagles football, where does he rank for you in terms of all-time Eagles? And I'm not talking stats. I mean, overall. When you combine the stats and what he meant to the team and what he meant to the city, where does he rank for you?
Well, a couple of years ago, I was asked to do an all-time Eagles team, 11 on offense, 11 on defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked my all-time Eagles team with 21 players because I put Chuck Bednarik as both my center,
right,
and my middle linebacker.
You play both sides. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so I had him in both spots. And listen, Chuck Bednarik is one of the all-time great players. But I'm now willing to put Jason Kelce as my all-time center.
Wow.
Put him, and when I say that I'm putting anybody ahead of Chuck Bednarik, I never thought that I'd say that, but I mean, Kelce's career warrants that. I mean, he has been that good, and much like Bednarik, Concrete Charlie. That's been Jason Kelce. I mean, 156 consecutive starts, club record.
It's amazing.
I mean, he's been a great player, a great leader, and he's been a guy that just plays through everything. I mean, he has the production, he has the greatness, he has the leadership and the durability that I never thought that I would ever going to put anybody ahead of Bednarik, but I'm prepared to put Jason Kelce there. Now, having said that, Chuck is still my middle linebacker.
Right.
Defense. Okay. So, and that one, I don't foresee that ever changing. I don't know if they'll ever have a middle linebacker like Bednarik, especially the way they bring linebackers in here.
Agreed. Well, that's true.
They don't. Yeah. But yeah, I think Kelce to me is the greatest center that's ever played for the Eagles. And now, in terms of overall, where does he rank among all players? I think he's probably the most beloved player. I don't think there's ever been a player who has connected with the fans the way this guy has. I mean, Brian Dawkins, was beloved in this town. Reggie White, absolutely beloved in this town. But there's an everyman quality to Jason Kelce that really connects with the blue collar 700 level Eagles fan, Philly fan. I mean, he's a guy that you go to a Sixers game, he's hitting the bell.
Yep.
You go to a Flyers game, he's standing in line in front of you getting a beer. If Phillies go to the World Series, he's on the field celebrating with them. I mean, he is totally, for a guy who's not from Philly, he has totally become of Philly. And in that respect, I don't know that I've seen in all the years I've been around the Eagles that they've had a guy quite like that. And so, yeah, I mean, he's unique. I mean, we're certainly, it's not like he's going to go away. I mean, we're still going to see plenty of Jason Kelce.
That is true.
But we just aren't going to see him. We aren't going to see him snapping the ball anymore.
But you know what else about the other two guys you mentioned, and I thought of those two guys, Brian Dawkins and Reggie White as well. Now, through no fault of their own, they played football in a different uniform. Jason Kelce only wore an Eagles jersey, and I think that kind of puts him over the top as well.
Yeah, and he made the point very clearly at his farewell press conference that was something that was really important to him, was that he only wanted, he did not want to play for another team. He wanted to have his whole career and finish his career as a Philadelphia Eagle, and not go to Green Bay and play 1 year and then come back here and sign like a one-day contract to retire as an Eagle. Right. That kind of ceremonial kind of thing. If he was going to retire as an Eagle, he was going to retire as an Eagle. And I respect that, because you just, you don't see it that much in today's free agent NFL. It just doesn't happen that much. I mean, you look at the great players that have, Emmitt Smith finished his career as an Arizona Cardinal,
Yeah, I think Joe Namath played for the Rams.
I mean, Jerry Rice was a Seattle Seahawk or something. Franco Harris was a Seattle Seahawk. I mean, even the greatest players finished their career in another jersey. Joe Montana went out as a Chief. So it's very rare in this day and age that you can play a long career and play it in one town with one team.
You know what?
And that was what Jason Kelce wanted, and that's what he did.
You just made me think of something else. One of the cool things about Kelce and Fletcher Cox as well, retiring when you're still on top. And you made me think of Steve Carlton when you talked about, other players who kind of bounced around in different uniforms. Remember when Steve Carlton left Philly? I mean, he went to what? He went to San Francisco. Was he in Cleveland? He was in Minnesota. Chicago White Sox. I mean, it was sad the way it ended for him.
Yeah, it was. But it was his choice.
Yeah.
I mean, he just didn't want to let it go. And I remember, it's interesting you mentioned Carlton case, because I was still writing. I was still a newspaper columnist, and I was writing for the Philadelphia Daily News.
Okay.
And I had written a couple of pieces that year about Carlton and about how sad it was to see him struggling to get out, to get out 7, 8, and 9 hitters. It was, and when the Phillies released him, and he just decided, I'm going to go off. I'm going to sign with the Giants. Want me? I'm going to go sign with the Giants. I remember interviewing Tim McCarver, who was then in the broadcasting, and McCarver had been his catcher. As everybody remembers, he had been Lefty's personal catcher for all those years, starting in St. Louis and then all through Philadelphia. So nobody knew Lefty more than Timmy did, and so the day that Steve makes his point about, okay, I'm not done yet. I'm going to sign a contract and go to the Giants. I talked to McCarver and I said, don't you think this is sad? Don't you think that he should just retire now and just go out as a Philly? And McCarver got so angry with me.
Really?
And Timmy and I had a really good relationship over the years when I was a columnist and he was a player and then a broadcaster. We got along really well. And I said that, and Timmy got really mad at me, like angry mad at me,
okay.
And said, you know, who are you? Who are you to tell Steve Carlton that it's time to walk away from baseball? What gives you that right? And he said, don't you understand that the fact that he still wants to go and keep pitching now, it's one of the things that made him great in the first place. That determination, that will to win, that never giving up kind of spirit. That's one of the things that made him Steve Carlton.
Makes sense.
And now, just because you think it's time and you want him to have a nice little bye-bye in Philadelphia, you're saying, yeah, it's time to go. He will decide when it's time to go because he's earned the right to say when it's time to go. And I had never thought about it that way. I had never thought about that part of the player, just that sort of thing that we're looking at. Why is he continuing to do this? Is really kind of the flip side of what made him great in the first place, is that never giving up. I'm going to prove to you that I'm the best. It's basically the same trait. It's just at a different point in their career. So I always remember having that discussion with Timmy, and it made me kind of rethink a lot of those sorts of moments that we have with great players when they get to the end of their career. Yeah, ultimately, it is their decision, and they've earned the right to make that decision and not have it made by guys like me.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't think you're trying to make the decision for him, but, at least with me as a fan, you hate to see somebody that great, and you alluded to this, you hate to see somebody that great struggle that much. You hate having that, the last memory of such a great player.
Yeah,
but I get Tim McCarver's point. I get his point.
Oh yeah, and I've never. I remember that. I remember that conversation like it happened 10 minutes ago, and it to me it was a great insight into how an athlete's mind works, and how they just don't view things the way we view them. I mean, even though those of us that are covering sports and we're around sports. And we're part of it, but we still don't really see it the way the athlete sees it, and we never will.
Right.
And so that's the kind of thing that when he said that, I thought, he's right. That makes perfect sense. I totally understand it. And listen, the Carlton thing, it never changed. I mean, he went to all those teams and he never got any better. He was there for a few games and got cut and he went somewhere else. And he never found it. He never regained it. It ended just the way we knew it was going to end.
Right.
But the fact is, that was his choice and that was how he wanted to go out. But nobody will say that about Jason Kelce.
Well, that's true.
Jason Kelce went out as an All-Pro, and his career is going to be one of the great ones. I have no doubt, none, that he will be a first ballot Hall of Fame guy. Philadelphia, don't even question that. Eagles Hall of Fame for sure, but he'll be first ballot in Canton.
Agreed.
I don't think there's any question. And then at some point he'll be joined by his brother. At some point, both of the Kelces will be in Canton. And right now there are no brothers in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Is that right?
There are none.
Wow.
There are no brothers. Now I think you will probably get the Mannings in there at some point.
You think Eli will get into?
Peyton's already in there, obviously. And I do believe that Eli will be voted in.
Okay.
I just don't know that Eli is going to be a first ballot guy.
What about?
I mean, you look at it. You look at his career; he's got a losing record.
Exactly.
So, but the fact is, he had the 2 Super Bowls, and 2 Super Bowl wins over the Patriots, 2 Super Bowl wins over Brady, and he's Eli. And had this incredible streak where he never missed a game. And the Mannings are kind of the royal family of quarterbacking. So I think that there will be enough support that Eli will get in. Now, I don't know that he'll be a first ballot guy.
Right.
It's conceivable that it may take him a little while, in which case maybe the Kelces will be the first pair to go in. But there's no question. There may be a little bit of a question about Eli completing the Manning thing, but there's no question that Jason and Travis will be standing side by side in Canton. And that is for sure. And I think you will have two very fun acceptance speeches.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a guarantee. All right, I want to get to a couple things before I let you go, Ray. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to ask you about after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and I know you've been asked this a million times, but I know you love talking about this. We're all watching the post-game show, watching you guys on NBC Sports Philly. Your son walks into the booth you guys were broadcasting from. I guess he was there working for NFL Films, and you guys hug and you get emotional. And it reminded me because shortly before I saw that on TV, I had the same moment with my own father. We were watching the game together. We hugged, and we were waiting a lifetime for this. And I'm thinking I'm never going to have this moment with my dad. And here we go. I have this moment with my dad. What was going through your mind? I guess something very similar. You probably thought that would never happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had that feeling, and I heard hundreds of Eagles fans saying the same thing. That I'll never see this team win a Super Bowl. I won't live long enough to see this team win a Super Bowl. A lot of people really, I mean, they weren't just saying that; they really believed that.
Yeah.
And so when it did happen that night. It was a very cathartic kind of thing for the whole city, for the whole region. And when my son came into the booth where we were doing the post-game show, after he had finished his duties with NFL Films, after he had finished, I have to give him his props. After he finished taking the shot, after getting the shot that everybody remembers, he was shooting the Nick Foles wiring. So he's the guy that got the shot of the sideline conversation between Doug Peterson and Nick Foles.
No kidding.
That shot of that conversation. You want Philly? Yeah, let's do it.
That's your
that
son.
Whole thing that we have seen how many thousands of times now. That's my son's shot.
Wow.
So he had just finished shooting that game, and then he came looking for me and found our booth, and then was sort of waiting. The idea wasn't going to be to do it on live television. He was just sort of standing off to the side, and we kind of made eye contact, and I kind of gave him okay, I'll be there in a minute. I'll wait till we go to a break, and then we'll celebrate. But Michael Barkan, who was moderating it as he always did, saw David, and all of a sudden thought, hey, let's bring him on. And so David came walking out, we hugged, and yeah, we both got very emotional. And I felt a little awkward about it at the time.
Really?
I mean, having that kind of emotion and shedding tears and crying on live television, I certainly never done that before. And I felt a little uneasy about it when it happened, and I sat back down. But Governor Rendell, who was sitting right next to me, said, hey, that moment you just had with your son, that's happening in every living room in the entire city of Philadelphia.
He is exactly right.
Jersey, the whole region.
Yep.
And believe me, that's what's happening everywhere back home. So don't worry about it. And I remember when I wrote my book, Finished Business, and I wrote about that whole thing, the line that I wrote as I was thinking about it was that David and I, we thought we were just putting our arms around each other, but we were in fact really putting our arms around all of Philadelphia. And that was, as I didn't really fully appreciate it at the moment, but I certainly appreciate it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great moment. Another moment that came to my mind, more of a lighter moment. It was before the game. I guess a couple days before the game, you guys were broadcasting from Minnesota leading up to the game, and you and Michael Barkan, I guess, were doing a joint broadcast with NBC Sports Boston, and I forget the circumstances, but one of the guys was ripping Philadelphia fans, and you let them have it, and it was great.
Yeah. Well, that was actually right before the game.
Oh, okay, right before the game. Okay.
That was Sunday afternoon, right before kickoff at the stadium, and yeah, it was the idea. There's a Comcast or an NBC Sports operation in Boston, same
Right.
as in Philadelphia. So they got this idea that why don't we just put both of the shows together and do one show, and it'll be Philly versus Boston.
Yeah.
And so I frankly I kind of said, count me out. I that's really not my kind of thing. I know what it's going to turn into, and that's really not my kind of television. I'm just Mr. X's and O's. I'm Mr. Meat and Potatoes. I'm not into all that kind of name calling and finger pointing. That's just not me. But Michelle Murray, who was the boss, said, no, you will do it. You're only going to be on for one segment, just but you're going to be out there. Okay, so I was on there, and it was Michael and me and Albert Breer of NFL Network, and the Boston guy was a fellow named Mike Felger, who is kind of the Angelo Cataldi of Boston.
Okay.
And a real sort of loud, kind of in your face sports talk radio guy. And yeah, you're right. I mean, he's just started in on Philly fans and how they were the worst, and how, I come to games in Philadelphia and I'm afraid somebody's going to hit me in the head with a metal chair, and they threw snowballs at Santa Claus, and he went through the whole litany of all the things that we've all heard ad nauseum about Philadelphia fans. And I just wasn't going to stand for it. And so, against my better judgment, I sort of threw it back at him, and I just told him he was full of crap, basically. And I felt when the segment ended and I walked off the set, I'm sort of kicking myself, saying, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this thing because I was afraid this is what it was going to turn into. And look at that, And then I turned out, when I got home, I was a big hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody said, that you stood up for us. You stood up for us, and you told that Boston guy, you told him off. I didn't realize at the time. I thought, oh boy, that looked so stupid. That looked so cheap.
No, it was great.
I feel really dumb for doing it. And it turned out that people here loved it. So, all's well that ends well. And then, of course, comes the game, and the Eagles pull off the big win. And then comes Philly special, and then the moment with my son. So that was about as perfect a day as you could ever imagine.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was a great moment. I want to ask you, and I was a kid when all this happened. Well, we're talking mid '80s. How close did the Eagles get to moving to Phoenix, and what do you remember about that?
Oh, real close, real close. Well, I'll give you the condensed version of it, but the Eagles owner at that time was a fellow named Leonard Toews,
right? Yeah,
who was who was in all kinds of financial trouble. He had lost as it turns out, he lost like $40 million gambling, and basically was in debt to everybody, and so we all knew that he was in trouble. But nobody knew that behind the scenes that he and the people in the front office, mostly his daughter, were negotiating with an investor out in Arizona to move the Philadelphia Eagles to Arizona. That this gentleman was going to buy a minority interest in the team. He was going to buy like 45%. Leonard would keep 55%. So he would still be the majority owner. But this guy was going to give them enough money that Leonard could pay off all his debts, and but the deal was contingent on the Eagles moving to Arizona. And so this was all going on, and none of us knew. Nobody in the Philadelphia media knew. And I was in bed one night, sound asleep, and like at 2:00 in the morning, my phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was our night sports editor. And he said, "Have you heard anything about the Eagles moving to Arizona?" And I mean, I almost fell out of bed. And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" And he said, "This story just came over the wire that the Eagles were going to move to Arizona." And I said, whoa. And so I turned the light on and trying to get my senses about me. And I said, wait a minute. I said, I don't know if I believe that. I said, "Who wrote the story?" And he said, "It's a guy named Bob Hurt in the Arizona Republic." And I said, "It's true." Because I knew Bob Hurt was one of those guys. He was an old guy who knew everybody in Arizona, all
Okay.
the sports people, all the politicians. So if Bob Hurt was writing it, it was for real. It
Yeah.
wasn't a rumor. That he knew enough people in high places that if he was willing to put his name on that story, it was for real. Well, of course, all hell breaks loose. The NFL gets involved, City Hall gets involved, and the Eagles wind up sort of under siege, and nobody's going to let them move anywhere. But I still to this day believe that if Bob Hurt had not broken that story out in Arizona, that it was just a matter of maybe 48 hours, the Eagles would have been on a moving van just like the Baltimore Colts were.
So
and
like
they would be in Arizona.
like in the middle of the night.
I honestly think it came that close.
Wow.
And the fact that the Eagles are still here, the people in Philadelphia, they can thank Bob Hurt of the Arizona Republic because I think he saved the franchise.
That's unbelievable. Now, do you know, had that come to fruition, would the name have gone, or would it have been like a Cleveland Browns thing where the name stayed here and then maybe another expansion team would have been the Eagles?
They had. I actually think they would have taken the Eagles. Yeah, I mean the league didn't. The league did not, because the Baltimore Colts had just gone. It wasn't that long before that.
Right.
And so the idea of keeping the name and keeping the colors and the records and all that stuff in place and bringing another team in there, that was a later idea.
Right.
That was somebody else came up with, which it's a very good idea, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Is to keep the history of the team in the city. And so I think they did it the right way in Cleveland. The Browns remained the Browns. But I think the Eagles would have been. I think the Eagles would have gone the way of the Colts, and they would be the Arizona Eagles now.
Can you imagine that? Wow. All right. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about Tommy and Me. Your relationship with Tommy McDonald turned into this successful play. Is that coming back anytime soon?
We are. There are talks about trying to find a theater this year. There's a couple of theaters in the Philadelphia area that are interested in it. There's a theater in Pottsville called the Majestic. They're interested in doing it. A couple of other theaters have expressed an interest. We haven't signed any papers yet, but I'm hoping it can happen. I mean, we've done the play. We debuted it in 2016, and we have produced it every year since, with the exception of 2020, which was the COVID year.
Sure.
We've produced the play every year at different theaters, Fringe Arts in Philadelphia, the Delaware Theater Company in Wilmington, the Hershey Theater in Hershey. We went to the Bucks County Playhouse twice. Last year we did the Uptown Performing Arts Center in Westchester. We've done, I guess 8 or 9 productions of Tommy and Me, and it's done wonderfully well, to the point where there's a documentary film being made about it, even as we speak.
Oh wow!
That should be completed and done this football season. And there's a movie producer out in Hollywood that came and saw it, and now he wants to make a movie out of it.
Wow!
So yeah, the Tommy and Me, the story of Tommy and Me has grown far beyond what I ever imagined it was going to be. But people have just loved it. I mean, even people who are too young to have ever seen Tommy McDonald or known Tommy McDonald have come to see this play and really just love the story about this little boy and his football hero and this very unlikely journey the two of them took to Canton, Ohio.
That's unbelievable, because in the end you kind of helped him get to the Hall of Fame, correct?
I sort of mounted the campaign to try and get him over the hump, because he had never even been a finalist. I mean, it'd been 16, 17 years. He had never, from his retirement, he had never even been a finalist. And he was my boyhood hero. I saw every game he played as an Eagle. I was there in 1960 championship game when he scored the touchdown. So he was my boyhood hero. And when I grew up and became a sports writer, and actually kind of found myself in a position where I could work to get him in the Hall of Fame, kind of get him that recognition, I set out that I'm determined I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep knocking on doors and making phone calls and writing letters until Tommy gets in the Hall of Fame. And so, yeah, and then it turned out that when he did get in 1998, he asked me to be his presenter in Canton.
That's such a great story.
What a great moment that was. I mean, here I am in the Hall of Fame parade, riding in an open convertible, sitting next to my boyhood idol on our way to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I'm going to present the speech introducing him into the Hall of Fame. I mean, it really is dream come true kind of stuff.
It really does sound like a Hollywood movie, but it's real life. But if they do make the movie out of this, I'm curious, who do you want to play Ray Didinger? Have you thought about it?
My wife has very strong opinions on that. She's holding out for Bradley Cooper.
Hey, he's an Eagles fan. That's perfect.
I mean, it could work. I mean, the guy is legit. I mean, he is a legit Eagles fan. So if it ever comes to that, and the movie ever does get made, I guarantee you that we will send a script to Bradley Cooper, and who knows, maybe he'll say yes.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. So how many books have you written, Ray?
12.
Oh my God, 12. And I guess you can get them all like on Amazon, right? They're all still available, right?
Yeah, you can pretty much. I mean, if you go and enter my name and Amazon, it'll pop up. It'll pop up. Some of the books are pretty old and probably out of circulation. I mean, the first one I did was 1971.
Wow. Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know that you're going to find that one anywhere. But the Eagles Encyclopedia, you can still get that. There's a book I did that's a collection of my favorite columns from over the years called One Last Read. That's now out in paperback. And the book that was my memoirs, the book of my looking back on my 50 years in the business, called Finished Business. That is definitely available, and that's still in bookstores. So if anybody wants to look up any of those or read any of those, you can find those pretty easily online.
Now, you began at the Bulletin, right, before the Daily News?
Yes. Well, yeah, I was at the Bulletin for 13 years.
You'll appreciate this. My parents, somewhere in their house, still have the final copy of the Bulletin.
Oh, yeah, that's a collector's item. I still have one.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I had left the Bulletin before it closed.
Right.
I left the Bulletin in 1980. The Daily News made me an offer to jump across town and work at the Daily News. And I felt a little, I was very ambivalent about it because we all knew the Bulletin was in really dire financial straits and was on the verge of collapse. But the Bulletin had given me my big opportunity, and I felt real loyal to them. And I didn't feel real good about walking out on them in their hour of need. But it just, there were just family considerations there. I mean, I was just afraid that I might not have an opportunity to go to a Philadelphia newspaper if I waited to the end of the Bulletin. The opportunity for the Daily News was there. I knew the guys on the staff. I respected it. It was the best sports section in town by far.
Oh my!
And so, in the summer of 1980, August of 1980, I made the decision to jump to the Daily News, and I was at the Daily News for 16 years and had a great time. I had a great time.
You're right. There were some great names on that staff. You and Stan Hochman and Bill Conlon. There was oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. Bill Fleischman, right? Bill Fleischman was there.
Bill Fleischman. We had
Mark Wicker.
Mark Wicker, boy, you got the whole bunch of them. I think that the Philadelphia Daily News, that sports staff, has, I think, the singular distinction of having one of their writers in each of the halls of fame of each sport that they cover. I don't know that any
interesting.
Maybe the Boston Globe might be able to say that, but I mean, you have Bill Conlon is in the Baseball Writers Hall of Fame. Dick Weiss is in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Phil Jasner is in the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Phil Jasner, of course.
Jay Greenberg is in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Stan Hochman is in the Horse Racing Hall of Fame.
I didn't know that.
Tom Cushman, Elmer Smith, and Bernie Fernandez are all in the Boxing Hall of Fame.
Elmer Smith, wow, there's a name.
So you name the sport, there's a Daily News writer in that sports Hall of Fame. And I don't know that any other newspaper can claim that.
That is impressive. That is impressive. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question before I let you go, and just to show you how far back this goes. I think I heard you tell this story to Steve Fredericks on WIP. Going one of the times he was filling in on a Saturday working with you. I guess he was filling in for Glenn, and you told him that you turned down a date with Christy Brinkley. Is that true?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I mean, it's what it was. The story has been retold by Angelo and by Glenn numerous times.
I'm sure.
And, and it's become somewhat distorted.
Got it.
It was not really a date.
Okay.
I was in New Orleans covering the rematch of Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran. The fight that wound up turning out to be No Mas. Remember that?
Sure, yeah.
And so I was down there to cover that. And in the days before the fight, like a couple days before the fight, I was at Duran's workout, and with a dozen other sports writers were watching Duran work out. And Christy Brinkley is there with a camera, and she's like a celebrity photographer. Don King, who was the promoter, brought her in to just bring a little glamour to the scene, basically, is what it amounts to. So she's going around snapping some pictures and all this stuff. And at one point, she kind of comes walking over to where the sports writers are, where we're all kind of standing there. And she strikes up a conversation with me, of all people, and just starts saying, I don't know anything about boxing. This is the first time I've ever been here. I don't know anything about this. Could you tell me what can you tell me about Roberto Duran? I don't know anything about him. So, I kind of tell her, poor kid, Panama, grew up on the streets, rich guy found him, took him to a gym, blah, 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 blah. So I give her the Cliff's Notes version of Roberto Duran. And she's saying, wow, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. So the workout ends. And she says, I really would like to learn some more about this. Why don't you and I go to lunch?
Okay.
And so the only trouble was I was on deadline. I mean, I had to write a big Roberto Duran piece for the next day's paper, and it had to be in at a certain time. And I only had 90 minutes to write that story and get it to Philadelphia. So I had to tell Christy Brinkley, I'd love to have lunch with you, but I'm sorry, I have to write. Now, the way Angelo and Glenn tell the story is that she was hitting on me, or she was coming on to me, or that she had something more in her mind than just lunch. I can assure you that was not the case. It was lunch, and it was a one-time only.
Got it.
And I would have loved to have had the time to do it, but unfortunately, as a professional newspaper man, deadline does come first.
Duty calls. See, but that's why you've been so successful, Ray. Ray, what can I say? The time flew by, and I so appreciate this. It is an honor to talk to you, and I can't thank you enough for doing this.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and looking forward to the Philly season. Looking forward to baseball starting up, and of course, not that far down the road, Eagles training camp. So the cycle will start all over again.
And I have about 10 things I didn't get to in this conversation, so I hope we can do this again soon, okay?
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, you take care too. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
And thank you for watching episode 10 of the Philly Sports Convo. We'll see you next time. Stay connected with us on social media. Join our Discord community and grab merch from our shop. The Philly Sports Convo is a Blue Eye Visual production.